After 12 long years of pouring my heart and soul into this company, I finally did it. I turned my father's business into a $75 million empire. The moment I had worked for, the moment that was supposed to be my crowning achievement. But all that success felt hollow in the moment it mattered most. It was a family dinner, and I had every reason to feel proud. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the warmth of family gathering around the table. It should have been a celebration. But something was off. My father's gaze lingered on me for a moment too long, and in that instant, I felt the weight of what was coming. He turned to me, his face framed by the dim light of the chandelier, and with a smile that I should have found reassuring, he said the words that would change everything. "Your brother will take over now." The world seemed to freeze. My heart sank, but I forced a smile. That's what I'd been trained to do, after all. Mask the hurt, keep it hidden beneath a veil of calm. I could already feel my stomach tightening as the words echoed in my mind. The room around me blurred, his words unraveling everything I had built in an instant. But I smiled back, as though none of it had pierced through me, as if it didn't feel like a knife in my chest. The dinner continued around us, a backdrop of idle chatter and congratulatory murmurs. My father had a hand resting proudly on Zach's shoulder, looking at him with that same satisfied grin that used to be reserved for me. I saw it, that unspoken approval, that silent nod that made it clear. He had already made up his mind long before the words left his mouth. "Your brother will take over now." The words repeated in my mind, each time more painful than the last. How many years had I spent building this company, fighting tooth and nail to transform it from the struggling logistics firm my father had started into the powerhouse it was today? How many sleepless nights, how many missed birthdays, how many sacrifices to reach this moment? And now, it didn't matter. All the late-night calls, the endless negotiations, the countless deals. All of it meant nothing. The decision had already been made, and the empire I had built was not mine to lead. Around the table, there were murmurs of approval. "Congratulations, Zach." I watched him lower his gaze, feigning modesty, but I knew the truth. Zach had never cared about this business. He'd spent the last decade hopping from one failed venture to another, each one more ill-fated than the last. Logistics, operations, he wasn't interested in any of it. What Zach cared about was power. And my father? My father had always believed the company was his to control, to pass down to the son. A son, he believed, was the rightful heir, no matter what it took to get him there. A daughter? Well, a daughter's place was temporary. A footnote in history. I swallowed the growing storm of emotions rising within me. I had learned long ago that showing weakness, showing pain, was unacceptable. It wasn't how we did things in this family. So I reached for my wine glass, steadying my hand, and lifted it with a composed smile, careful to make sure no one saw the storm brewing behind my eyes. "To Zach," I said smoothly, my voice unwavering. The guests raised their glasses in response, oblivious to the turmoil that churned within me. My mother's eyes flicked to mine across the table. There was no need for words between us. I knew she understood. Unlike my father, she had always seen the effort I put in, even if she never interfered. She would never speak up, but she knew. And then there was my father. He sat there with that same proud, unwavering grin, completely oblivious to the fact that his words had already set something in motion, something that could never be undone. I glanced at Zach. He caught my eye from across the table, his lips curling into a smirk, barely hidden, a silent challenge in his gaze. That was when I knew. This wasn't just about my father's decision. Zach had been waiting for this moment. He'd carefully positioned himself, playing the dutiful son, the one who had finally found his calling, just in time to claim his birthright. A son inherits the empire, after all. I felt the walls closing in. The very air seemed to grow heavier. My father saw no flaw in his logic. He was a traditionalist, and that tradition dictated that Zach would take over the reins. It was as simple as that. But what neither of them realized, what neither of them had considered, was that I had spent the last 12 years not just building this company, but fortifying my place in it. And tomorrow morning they would learn exactly what that meant. The night dragged on, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the words my father had spoken. "Your brother will take over now." They echoed in my head like a broken record, each repetition wearing away at the carefully constructed calm I had been holding on to. The dinner table felt colder, the room more suffocating. Every conversation around me blurred into a haze of polite laughter and idle chatter, but it was as if I were no longer part of the gathering. I could still hear the faint clinking of silverware against plates, the murmur of voices, but none of it reached me. Instead, I kept seeing my father's face, that proud, knowing smile of his, and I realized then, he had already decided, long before he spoke those words. My entire life's work, all of it, had meant nothing in that moment. The company I had fought for, bled for, sacrificed everything for, it was no longer mine. It was his to give away just like that. I glanced at Zach. His eyes met mine for the briefest moment, that smirk of his never quite reaching his eyes. He was always so sure of himself, always the one who never had to try. Unlike me, he hadn't had to fight for his place at the table. I had clawed my way to the top, spent years proving my worth, but for Zach, it had all been handed to him on a silver platter. And now, it seemed, the culmination of all my hard work would be his to inherit. A heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional laughter or the clink of glasses. But I couldn't shake the feeling of a cold, sharp edge slicing through my chest. My father's choice was final. The empire I had spent 12 years building was now Zach's to command, and I had no place in it anymore. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. The next morning, everything changed. I had always known there was something about this family. Something unsaid, something unacknowledged. The unspoken rules, the dynamics that were hidden behind smiles and formalities. My father's preference for Zach had been subtle at first, but over the years it became impossible to ignore. Zach was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, even if he never once showed any interest in the business. And now, in one single stroke, my father had reaffirmed that belief. I got to the office early that day, like I always did. The familiar hum of the building, the soft shuffle of employees preparing for another day, it should have comforted me. Instead, it felt like walking into a battlefield. I could already feel the shift in the air, the whispering currents that had begun circulating after my father's announcement. The employees, the board members, they had already heard. They knew who was supposed to be in charge now. There was a certain chill in the air as I walked through the lobby. The receptionists glanced up, but they quickly returned to their tasks, avoiding my gaze. A few department heads hurried past me, pretending not to notice the tension that clung to the air like smoke. Some greeted me, but their words felt hollow, their smiles strained. No one dared to acknowledge what was happening. Everyone was waiting for the next shoe to drop. I could feel it then, the weight of their expectations, the silent judgment. Some of them were already loyal to Zach, others uncertain. But I knew this, whatever they thought was coming next, whatever they expected, they were wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stepped into my office, shutting the door behind me with a soft click. The familiar sound of the air conditioning, the distant chatter from the hallway, all of it seemed distant now. I was alone, but the weight of the moment pressed down on me. I wasn't just walking into my office today. I was walking into war. With a steady hand, I powered on my computer. I could feel the adrenaline kicking in, a rush of clarity washing over me as the screen illuminated with a list of documents. Contracts, shareholder agreements, financial statements. This was my territory. I knew these documents better than anyone. I had built this company from the ground up, and today they were going to learn exactly how far I had gone to secure my place. At exactly 8:45 a.m., I heard the familiar footsteps in the hallway, the echo of voices outside my door. My father, Zach, they were coming. They thought they were walking into a simple transition. into a future where Zach was handed the CEO title and I quietly stepped aside. But they were wrong. What they didn't know was that I had already made my move. By the time they walked through that door, I would have already won. I leaned back in my chair, letting the hum of the office fade into the background as my thoughts drifted back to the beginning. Back to when everything was simpler, or maybe it just felt that way because I hadn't yet known what it would cost me. My father had started Harper & Company when I was just a child. I remember the nights when the only light in the house came from his office, where he sat hunched over stacks of paperwork, working long hours with the weight of the world on his shoulders. The business was small, barely scraping by in those early years, but I was too young to understand the gravity of it all. All I knew was that my father, the man who I looked up to more than anyone in the world, was fighting every day just to keep it alive. Growing up, there were no vacations, no time off, no moments of reprieve. Every weekend, every holiday, was another opportunity for my father to chase after one more contract, one more deal. I watched him sacrifice everything, his health, his time, even his relationship with us, for the sake of the company. And as a kid, I hated it. I hated how we never got to go on family trips. I hated how his work was always more important than us. But I also understood. I understood even then that this was his dream, the only dream he had ever had. By the time I turned 24, I had just graduated from business school, armed with a shiny degree and an eagerness to prove myself. My father, always hesitant to let anyone into the business, finally offered me a chance to step in. But it wasn't a gift. No, it was a battle. I had to fight for that opportunity, argue for it, prove that I could handle the pressure. Nothing was handed to me, and when I finally got that first taste of what it was like to be part of the company, I knew there was no turning back. I didn't just want to be involved. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to transform Harper & Company into something that my father never imagined possible. And I did. Over the years, I turned a small, struggling logistics company into a national powerhouse. I expanded operations, secured million-dollar contracts, and integrated cutting-edge technology that revolutionized the industry. At first, it was all about survival, keeping the company afloat, making sure we had the capital to move forward. But soon, it became more than that. I wasn't just fighting to keep the company from sinking. I was fighting to make it something bigger, something unassailable. Every decision, every late-night call, every negotiation, it was all in service of this vision. I poured everything I had into Harper & Company. Every ounce of energy, every drop of blood, sweat, and tears went into building something that would outlast us all. And I didn't stop there. I made the tough calls, the ones that no one else was willing to make. I cut ties with partners who were dragging us down. I fired people who weren't up to the challenge, and I pushed the boundaries of what was possible, all while maintaining a level of excellence that my father could never have dreamed of. And yet, despite all of that, in that one moment, your brother will take over now, it felt like none of it mattered. All the late nights, all the sacrifices, all the blood, sweat, and tears. It didn't matter. I had spent 12 years building this company, but it was never going to be enough. Not for my father. Not for Zach. As I sat in my office, staring at the computer screen, the weight of it all settled over me. I had fought for this. I had earned this. But in the end, it wasn't my fight to win. It was theirs. They had already decided. But that didn't mean the fight was over. Far from it. If they thought I was going to sit idly by and watch everything I'd worked for slip away, they had another thing coming. I had spent 12 years building this company, my company, and I wasn't about to let them take it from me without a fight. The thought of my father's face that night, his pride in Zach's victory, fueled the fire inside me. I had never been the favorite. That much was clear. But I had never needed to be. I had always known that I was capable, that I could do more than anyone had ever expected of me. And now it was time to show them. It was time to remind them exactly who I was. The fight wasn't just for the company. It was for everything I had sacrificed. For every night I had stayed up working when the rest of the world was asleep. For every moment I had missed with friends, with family. For every birthday, every holiday that I had skipped. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about something much bigger. This was about reclaiming my legacy. The hours after my father's announcement passed in a blur, but the weight of what had been said lingered in my chest like an unshakable ache. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. My father's decision wasn't just about the company. It was about something deeper, something personal, something I couldn't ignore. I had spent years proving myself, making this company my life, my purpose. And yet, in that one moment, my father's smile had stripped it all away, as though everything I had worked for was simply a footnote in the history of Harper and Company. I had always known my place in this family, always the dutiful daughter, always the one who followed the rules, worked in the shadows, and played the part one was given. But it was clear now that the part one had been playing had never been enough. To my father, I was just a placeholder, a temporary measure until Zach could step in and claim his birthright. And what hurt the most was that my father didn't even seem to care how much I had invested in the company, how much I had sacrificed. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My father didn't see me. He never truly saw me. For all the late nights, the heartache, the decisions I had made in the best interest of Harper and Company, none of it had mattered to him. My entire life had been shaped by this business, and now, in his eyes, I was disposable. The empire I had built with my own hands was to be handed over to someone who had never once proven he could carry it. As I walked through the halls of Harper and Company the next morning, everything felt different. The familiar sights, the polished floors, the hum of employees at work were the same, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. People were avoiding my gaze, the usual greetings falling flat, their eyes darting away the moment they made contact with mine. The whispers had started. The news of my father's announcement had already spread, and with it, the doubt and uncertainty that followed. It wasn't just the employees who were unsure of where their loyalty should lie. It was everyone. The board, the executives, even the investors. Everyone who had once looked to me for direction, for leadership, now found themselves caught between two sides. One side, the side that believed in the future I was building for Harper and Company. The other, the side that believed in tradition, the side that believed a son should inherit the company no matter what. I could feel the pull of it, the weight of those expectations pressing down on me. But more than anything, I could feel the silence, the silent decision that had been made for me. My father had chosen Zach, and with that choice he had decided who would succeed him. But what he hadn't realized was that this wasn't just a decision about who would sit in the CEO's chair. It was a decision about power, about control, about everything that I had worked for. I paused for a moment in the hallway, letting the reality of it all settle in. There was no going back now. My father's decision had set things in motion, but it had also given me something I hadn't had before: clarity. The moment I realized the depth of his decision, I knew exactly what I had to do. This wasn't just about keeping the company. It was about making sure no one could ever take it from me again. My mind was racing now, plans forming in rapid succession. I had spent years securing my position within this company, making sure that no one, least of all my father, could ever take it away from me. Every contract I had signed, every deal I had negotiated, every strategic decision I had made was all part of a much larger plan. And now that plan was coming to fruition. But it wasn't just about business anymore. It was about proving something. Proving to my father, to Zach, and to everyone else who had ever doubted me, that I wasn't just a placeholder. That I wasn't just the daughter who had been biding her time. I was the one who had built this company. I was the one who had made it what it was. And I would be damned if I was going to let anyone take it from me now. The tipping point had come, and with it, the realization that this fight wasn't just about Harper and Company. It was about my place in the world, my legacy. I wasn't just fighting for control of a company. I was fighting for everything I had ever worked for. And I wasn't about to lose. Not now. Not ever. That night I barely slept. The hours seemed to stretch on, each minute heavier than the last, as the gravity of the decision I had made settled deep within me. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, all focused on one thing: taking back what was mine. I couldn't let my father's choice stand. I couldn't let Zach, with all his unearned confidence, waltz into my place as though everything I had fought for meant nothing. I had been preparing for this moment for years, even if I hadn't fully understood it at the time. Every negotiation, every strategic move I had made, every contract I had signed had been part of a much larger plan. I had been building something far more valuable than just a company. I had been building my position within it. And now, as I lay awake in the quiet of the night, I knew it was time to put that plan into action. I didn't need to be a hero. I didn't need to prove to anyone that I was capable. I had already done that. The real battle wasn't just about the company. It was about power. And now I was going to show them just how far I would go to keep it. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't fighting for the CEO title. I was fighting for my place in this world, my legacy. I was fighting for respect, for control, for everything they had tried to strip away from me. I sat at my desk, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The office was eerily quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of silence that only existed before a storm. I knew my father and Zach would be expecting a meek surrender in the morning. They probably thought I'd simply accept their decision and fall in line, just as I had done for so many years. But they were wrong. They didn't know me the way they thought they did. The first step was simple: control. I powered up my computer, my fingers moving swiftly across the keys. I pulled up every contract, every shareholder agreement, every document I could find that proved I was the majority shareholder. The data was there, buried in the fine print. I had been preparing for this moment, securing my position when no one was looking, when they all thought I was just playing the dutiful daughter. I had outsmarted them both. They hadn't realized that while they were busy planning their next move, I had already secured mine. Every key decision, every financial restructuring, every transfer of power, they had all been carefully calculated. I knew this company inside and out, better than anyone. And now, with just a few clicks, I could solidify my hold on it once and for all. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The weight of what I was about to do wasn't lost on me, but I knew it had to be done. There was no other way. I wasn't just going to sit back and watch everything I had built crumble to dust. I had worked too hard for this. I had sacrificed too much. By the time I closed my laptop and stood up from my desk, I had already made my move. I was ready. The plan was set, the pieces in place, and all that was left was to carry it out. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and nothing was going to stop me. The battle was coming, and I was prepared to fight it with everything I had. I had spent 12 years building this company, but tonight, I was going to prove that I was more than just a businesswoman. I was a force to be reckoned with. And tomorrow, when my father and Zach walked into that office, they would learn just how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. It was a reckoning, and I wasn't backing down. The morning came too quickly, its pale light creeping through the blinds and casting long shadows across my office. The quiet that surrounded me was almost suffocating. As I sat at my desk, the calmness of the room felt deceptive, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Everything seemed suspended in time, as if nothing had truly shifted yet, but I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. The battle was coming, and I was ready. I had spent the entire night preparing, calculating every move, reviewing every document until my eyes ached. But now, as I looked at the clock and saw the minutes ticking away, I realized that no amount of preparation could truly prepare me for what was about to unfold. The calm of the morning was merely the quiet before the chaos. I stood up from my desk, my heels clicking against the marble floors as I walked toward the window. The city outside looked unchanged, a bustling world full of people going about their routines, unaware of the war that was about to erupt inside the walls of Harper and Company. For a moment, I allowed myself to take in the view, the skyscrapers that I had helped build, the skyline that I had dreamed of seeing from this very spot. And then the moment passed. I turned back toward my desk, ready to face the day. My father and Zach would be arriving soon. They thought they were walking into a simple transition, that everything was set in stone. I could already picture them in my mind. My father with that smug, authoritative grin of his, and Zach, eager to claim what he believed was rightfully his. They had no idea what was coming. I glanced at the documents spread out across my desk, each one a carefully constructed piece of evidence that would unravel their plans. My fingers hovered over the papers for a moment, the weight of what I was about to do settling deep within me. This wasn't just about taking back control of the company. This was about proving a point not just to my father and Zach, but to myself. I had fought for everything I had achieved, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially not them, take it from me. The door to my office creaked open, and I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The silence outside had been broken, and I could hear the faint footsteps of employees moving in the hallways, the buzz of activity slowly returning as the company's day began. But there was a difference now, an undercurrent of tension, a quiet buzz of nervous energy in the air. People were already whispering, already picking sides, unsure of where loyalty should lie, and I could feel their uncertainty, their hesitation. The storm was building, and it was only a matter of time before it hit. But for now, the calm was all I had. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. In the next few minutes, my father and Zach would walk through that door, expecting a simple, unquestioned transition of power. They would believe that I had no choice but to accept their decision, to bow to tradition, to let them take what was mine. But I wasn't going to make this easy for them. I wasn't going to let them win without a fight. I stood tall, my posture unshaken, and as I waited for them to arrive, I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The calm before the storm had ended, and now the real battle was about to start. The door swung open with the unmistakable sound of my father's commanding presence filling the room. He strode in, head held high, a slight smirk playing on his lips as he took in the familiar surroundings of my office, as if he were walking into a meeting with someone who had long accepted defeat. Behind him, Zach followed with the same smug confidence, his eyes scanning the room, clearly relishing the idea that today, the throne would finally be his. They both stood there for a moment, sizing up the scene as though nothing had changed, as if this was all part of the plan. They had no idea what was coming. I didn't rise to greet them. I didn't need to. I stayed seated, the calm in my eyes belying the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I met my father's gaze with steady eyes, unwilling to let him see any hint of the anger that was simmering inside me. Zach, on the other hand, couldn't hide his smirk as he looked at me. He had no idea that the power he thought he had already claimed was slipping through his fingers, and I was going to make sure he knew it. "Well, Lena?" my father began, his tone as authoritative as ever. "I trust you're aware of the transition taking place today?" I let the silence hang for a moment, allowing his words to linger in the air. I could feel the weight of the moment, the tension tightening around us like a noose. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest, my gaze never wavering from my father's face. "I'm aware," I said smoothly, my voice calm, controlled. "I'm aware of everything." Zach's grin widened, and he crossed his arms, clearly relishing the moment. "Good," he said, his voice dripping with false humility. "I'll be stepping in as CEO, and I'll need you to help with the handover. Just show me the ropes and make sure everything's in place before you officially step aside." I could feel my blood start to boil, but I kept my expression neutral, my face an impassive mask. I wasn't going to let him see how much his words stung. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. "I'm not stepping aside," I replied, my voice cold and sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "Not in the way you think." Both my father and Zach froze. They hadn't expected that. I could see it in their eyes, the confusion, the disbelief. My father's face twitched ever so slightly, a flicker of irritation passing across his features, but he quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Lena, this isn't up for debate," he said, his voice tight as if speaking to a child. "We've made our decision. Zach is taking over. You'll help with the transition. That's the way this works." I let out a slow, controlled breath, then stood up, my heels clicking against the marble floor. I walked around the desk, meeting my father's eyes head-on. The power in the room shifted with every step I took, and I could see it in the way my father's posture stiffened, in the way Zach's smug grin faltered just a fraction. "You're mistaken, Dad," I said, the words rolling off my tongue like ice. You don't have the authority to make that decision. My father's face hardened, the flicker of surprise quickly replaced by the familiar, stubborn resolve. But before he could respond, I pressed a button on my desk. The large screen on the wall flickered to life, and the document I had been preparing appeared, glowing on the screen for them to see. "Do you even know what this is?" I asked, my voice smooth, almost daring him to answer. Zach shifted uneasily, his earlier confidence slowly slipping away as he looked at the document. "It's a shareholder agreement," he muttered, his voice unsure. I nodded, my gaze unwavering. "Yes, it is. But it's not just any shareholder agreement. This is the document that you both seem to have forgotten about." I paused for a moment, watching their faces carefully. This agreement clearly states that any transfer of executive power, such as appointing a new CEO, requires the approval of all majority shareholders. I turned to my father then, my eyes locking with his. "And I hold 60% of the company's shares." The silence in the room was deafening. I could see the realization dawn on my father's face, the color draining from his skin. Zach, on the other hand, looked like he had been punched in the stomach. His mouth opened and closed as he tried to find words, but none came. "Impossible," Zach muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. "No, it's very possible," I replied, my voice colder than ever. "You see, while you've been busy pretending to learn about the business, and while my father has been busy with his public appearances, I've been securing something far more valuable than your opinion. I've been securing my place." I leaned in slightly, the words hanging in the air between us. "Do you remember when you needed capital for expansion in 2017, Dad? You signed over an additional 15% of your shares to me in exchange for my investment. And in 2019, when we had that legal battle, you transferred another 10% as collateral, which you never bothered to reclaim. That, plus my original 35%, makes me the majority shareholder." Zach's face twisted with panic. "You're bluffing," he spat, his fists clenching at his sides. I pulled out another document from my drawer, the most recent legal filing with the state. I handed it to Zach, watching as his hands shook while he scanned the papers. It didn't take long for him to realize the truth. The blood drained from his face, his expression growing more frantic by the second. You can't do this," he stammered, his voice breaking. "Dad, tell her she can't do this." But my father was silent, his face unreadable, his gaze locked on the screen. He knew that I had outmaneuvered him, and there was nothing he could do to change it. I straightened up, my gaze firm, unwavering. "I'm not firing you, Zach, but I am taking control of this company. You'll report to me. You'll work under my leadership. Or, if you prefer, you're free to leave. I'll buy out your shares at market value." Zach opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He looked to my father, his eyes pleading, but my father remained silent, a look of helplessness flickering in his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't the patriarch of this family. He wasn't in control. And as I stood there, watching my brother crumble, I felt a strange sense of finality wash over me. This was it. The moment I had been working toward for 12 long years had finally arrived. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and suffocating, as I waited for one of them to make a move. But they didn't. They couldn't. Because this was my company now. And no one, not even family, would take it from me. The silence lingered in the room like a heavy fog, thick with tension and unspoken realizations. My father and Zach stood frozen, caught in the weight of the truth I had just laid before them. The documents on the screen were undeniable, the evidence clear. They had underestimated me, both of them, and now they were left with no way out. Zach's hands trembled as he clutched the shareholder agreement, his mind clearly racing, trying to piece together how this had all happened right under his nose. He shot a glance at my father, who remained eerily still, his expression unreadable. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath their feet, and neither of them could quite grasp the magnitude of what I had just revealed. I watched them, the two men who had shaped my life and my future, and for the first time, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before: power. True power, not the kind that came with a title or a position, but the kind that came from knowing without a doubt that I had control. Control over the company. Control over my future. Control over everything they thought they could take from me. I took a slow step toward the desk, my fingers grazing the edge as I leaned in slightly, letting the weight of my next words settle in. "You both thought you could just walk in here and claim what was never yours," I said softly, my voice a quiet storm. "But you were wrong. All of you. I wasn't just your backup plan. I wasn't just the daughter who was waiting for the right time. I was here, building this company from the inside out, while you were too busy playing the roles you thought you were meant to play." The words hung in the air, sharp and biting, and I saw the flicker of realization flash across my father's face. But it wasn't just understanding. It was the cold, hard acceptance that he had misjudged me, misjudged everything. The man who had spent so many years building his empire, the man who had made countless decisions for the sake of his legacy, was now standing here powerless. And it was my victory, my quiet triumph, that had brought us to this point. Zach stood frozen, his face contorted with frustration, but there was nothing he could do. The numbers were there. The ownership was mine. I had spent years laying the groundwork, securing the company's future, and now, in this moment, I held the reins. There was no escape for them. "You're both upset because you thought the company was a given," I continued, my voice steady. "But you were wrong. The company wasn't ever just yours to give away. It was mine, and I've made sure of that." I let the words settle between us, the truth hanging in the air like a weight none of us could escape. Zach's eyes darted from the papers to my father, the fear in his gaze now impossible to ignore. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. My father, on the other hand, finally broke the silence with a tight, forced exhale, his gaze still locked on me. His jaw clenched, but there was no anger there, just a raw, unspoken acknowledgement of his mistake. I stood tall, the power I had fought for finally coursing through my veins. "It's over, Zach," I said, my voice cutting through the thick silence. "You can leave if you want. I'll buy out your shares at market value. You can walk away with the money and start fresh. Or you can stay, but you'll work for me. You'll report to me. No more pretending. No more playing games." Zach's eyes flickered with disbelief, but my father said nothing. I could feel the weight of the moment press down on us. There was no room for negotiation anymore. The power had shifted, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it back from me. I let the silence stretch on for a moment longer, savoring the feeling of having the upper hand for once. "It's not about the money or the title," I said quietly, turning toward my father. "It's about respect. It's about proving to you both that I was never meant to be the backup. I was meant to lead." My father didn't respond. He didn't have to. His silence spoke volumes. And in that moment, I understood something that I had never fully allowed myself to accept. I had done it. I had won. Not just the company, not just the power, but the respect I had longed for. The battle was over, and I had come out on top. Zach, still reeling from the shock, looked at my father once more, his face pale with the realization of what had just happened. But it was clear now, he had no power here anymore. Neither of them did. This was my company, my future, and no one was going to take it from me again. I stood there, facing them both, and for the first time I felt no hesitation, no doubt. Only clarity. This was my victory. The company was mine, and nothing would ever take that away from me. The days that followed were a blur of change, tension, and a quiet, unsettling realization that nothing would ever be the same again. As word of my victory spread through the company, the ripple effects were immediate. Employees who had once looked to me with trust and loyalty now cast uncertain glances in my direction. The board members who had stood by me in the past now hesitated, their allegiance wavering as they watched the fallout unfold. It wasn't just the business that was fractured. It was the entire foundation I had built, the fragile balance between family and company that had always been teetering on the edge. At first, there were whispers, quiet conversations in the hallways behind closed doors, as people tried to make sense of what had happened. The unspoken question hung in the air. Could I really lead now? Was I capable of holding the reins after everything that had just transpired? The board meetings were tense, everyone on edge, eyes darting around the table, waiting for someone to make the first move. My father's absence was palpable, his silence a shadow that seemed to loom over every decision. He had always been the patriarch, the figurehead, the one who commanded respect with a single glance. But now, it was me they were looking to, and I could feel the weight of their doubt, their uncertainty, like 1,000 silent eyes watching my every move. I could almost hear their questions, their doubts, echoing in my mind. Was she strong enough? Could she handle the pressure? They had never seen me as I truly was, someone capable of standing on my own, of taking the reins, of building something that was mine and mine alone. To them, I had always been the daughter, the one who played her part and stayed in the background. But now, with my father sidelined and Zach nowhere to be found, I was the one who had to carry the weight of this company. And I couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now, not when every decision I made was scrutinized, every step I took under the microscope. The fractures within the family were just as evident. My relationship with Zach, once cordial and distant, had become something far more strained. He had disappeared, retreated to his corner of the world, licking his wounds, playing the victim to anyone who would listen. I could imagine him now, sitting in some upscale cafe or high-rise apartment, painting himself as the betrayed son, the one who had been unjustly robbed of his birthright. The narrative was already being shaped, the story of his corporate betrayal slowly gaining traction, as he whispered his grievances to relatives, friends, and anyone who would lend him an ear. But the truth, the real truth, was that Zach had never earned this position. He hadn't spent years building the company, making the hard decisions, fighting for every contract, every client. And yet, despite everything, despite the years of sacrifice and struggle, my father had chosen him. It was a painful truth, one I had swallowed in silence, but now it wasn't just my fight. It was about keeping what was rightfully mine. And then there was my father. The man who had built this empire, who had taught me everything I knew, was no longer the man I once admired. His absence from the boardroom meetings, his silence in the face of my decisions, it all spoke volumes. He hadn't contested my move, not openly, not since that first confrontation in my office. He had retreated into the shadows, unwilling to face the consequences of his actions. He had underestimated me, and now he was left to watch from the sidelines as I took control. There was no confrontation, no argument, just silence. And in that silence, I realized the full weight of what had happened. Not just the loss of my father's support, but the quiet death of the relationship we had once shared. I wasn't naive enough to believe that everything would be fine. This wasn't a fairy tale where everything fell into place the moment I took the reins. The fractures in my family, in my company, were deep, and they wouldn't heal overnight. But as I sat in my office, overlooking the city skyline I had built my empire in, I felt a quiet certainty settle within me. This was my time now, my moment, and nothing was going to tear it down. The company would survive, but it would never be the same again. The alliances had shifted, and the people who had once supported me now had to decide where they stood. And I knew this. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. There would be those who would test me, who would question my leadership, who would attempt to take control. But I was ready. I had spent years preparing for this moment, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. For better or worse, the company was mine now. And as for the family, the damage had been done. The bridge had been burned, and there was no going back. I had always fought for this company, but now I would fight for its future, for my future. The battle had shifted from one of survival to one of dominance. And in that moment, I knew there was only one thing left to do. Ensure that no one, not even family, could ever take what was mine again. A week had passed since the dust settled, since the silence had swallowed the space where a battle once raged. The company was mine now, and the boardroom was quieter than it had ever been. Yet there was a lingering tension, something unspoken, hanging in the air like a cloud that refused to dissipate. My father had not yet contacted me, had not once tried to discuss what had transpired. It was as if he was waiting for something, waiting for me to falter, waiting for me to show some sign of weakness. But I didn't falter. I never had. I wasn't about to start now. And then, one afternoon, as I sat alone in my office, reviewing yet another round of financial projections, my phone buzzed. The number on the screen was familiar, too familiar. My heart skipped a beat as I read the name. It was him, my father. He wanted to meet. I didn't hesitate. I accepted without a second thought. There was no more running from this. There was no more hiding. If there was anything left to salvage, this was the moment to face it. I arrived at the restaurant early, the quiet hum of the city outside almost deafening in its contrast to the stillness that seemed to follow me as I walked through the doors. When I saw him, sitting alone at the back table, the weight of everything hit me all over again. He looked different, somehow older, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. The man who had once towered over me with his confidence, with his belief that the world was his to command, now seemed small. The cracks in the image I had held of him for so long were painfully visible. He didn't stand as I approached. He didn't offer any grand gestures of affection or greeting. Instead, he simply looked up at me, his eyes a mixture of resignation and something else, something I couldn't quite name. I sat down across from him, the silence between us thick and suffocating. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything, of the decisions, the consequences, the years of silence, hung in the air like a dense fog. Finally, my father exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "You've made your point," he said, his voice quiet, almost hollow. "You've won, Lena." I didn't reply immediately. The words I had prepared, the speech I had rehearsed in my mind for days, felt suddenly inadequate. There was no victory here, no triumph. There was only a deep, aching void where a father's love and trust should have been. "I never wanted to win this way," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But you left me no choice." He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine for something. Perhaps an apology, perhaps understanding, perhaps a crack in the armor I had so carefully built. But there was none. No apologies. No understanding. Just the cold, hard reality of what had been lost. "You were never just my daughter, Lena," he continued, his voice tight. "You were my legacy. I built this company for you, but I didn't know you were capable of this, of taking it all, without hesitation, without even looking back." I swallowed, the bitter taste of his words stinging in my chest. "I didn't take anything from you, Dad. You took everything from me first. You never saw me for who I really was. You only saw what you wanted me to be." My voice shook, but I steadied myself, meeting his gaze head-on. "I built this company. I made it what it is. And you were too busy looking past me to see it." His face twitched, the pain of my words evident, but he didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I realized that he was truly seeing me. Not as a daughter, not as an extension of his own legacy, but as something else. Something he had never fully recognized. "You were always more than just a backup plan," I said, my voice softer now, tinged with the weight of everything unsaid between us. "But you didn't believe in me. Not until it was too late." My father didn't speak for a long time. He just sat there, looking at me with a kind of resignation I had never seen before. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter this time, as if the words were too heavy to bear. "I underestimated you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I never thought you'd do this. I thought you'd always fall in line. I thought you'd always be the one to step aside. But you didn't. And I don't know how to fix that." I sat back in my chair, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of guilt. But it was something. Something that felt like the beginning of the end for the facade we had both lived under for so many years. "You don't have to fix anything, Dad," I replied, my voice calm, steady. "There's nothing to fix anymore. The company is mine. And whether or not you approve doesn't matter anymore." I've made my peace with it. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence that stretched on between us, before he spoke again. I'm retiring, he said quietly. Effective immediately. I'll sell my shares. I'll keep a small percentage, but I'm done. The finality of his words hit me harder than I expected. For all the years of conflict, for all the battles we had fought in silence, it was over. My father was walking away. The man who had built the empire, the man who had once been the center of everything, was stepping aside. And Zach? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He took the buyout, my father replied, his voice distant, resigned. He won't be coming back. I felt a strange ache in my chest, a mix of relief and sorrow. The family I had fought for, the legacy I had built, was fractured beyond repair. But it was mine now, all of it. I stood up from the table, the finality of the moment settling in my bones. Goodbye, Dad, I said quietly. Take care of yourself. He didn't answer. He just nodded, his gaze following me as I walked away. As I stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, I realized that everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, had led to this. The company was mine, but the cost of it all had been higher than I ever could have imagined. Family, trust, love, all of it had been shattered in the pursuit of power, and now all I had left was the company. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need for anyone's approval. Not from my father, not from Zach, and not from anyone else. The empire was mine, and no one could take that from me again. The days that followed my father's retirement were both a blur and a revelation. The weight of leadership had settled onto my shoulders like a mantle, heavy but undeniable. I was no longer the daughter waiting for approval or the shadow of my father's legacy. I had become the driving force behind Harper & Company, and with that came a newfound sense of purpose. The world was watching, waiting to see if I could truly carry the weight of everything that had been passed down to me. But in my heart, I knew this was not just about keeping the company alive. This was about making it untouchable, about shaping its future in a way that no one could have foreseen. The first weeks were the hardest. I had to prove myself to those who had doubted me, to those who still whispered behind closed doors about my ability to lead. The boardroom, once a space where my father held absolute power, was now my domain. I wasn't just sitting at the head of the table, I was commanding it. And with each decision I made, with each contract I signed, I knew the stakes were higher than ever before. But I wasn't afraid. Fear had no place in my world now. I had worked too long and too hard to let doubt cloud my vision. Harper & Company had been built on tradition, on the old ways. My father had always believed in doing things the way they had always been done, never questioning the status quo, never pushing for change unless it was absolutely necessary. But I saw things differently. I didn't want to merely preserve what my father had created. I wanted to evolve it, to shape it into something more, something that would stand the test of time and outlast any legacy he had ever imagined. I started with the systems, the outdated processes that had been holding us back. The company had grown, but it had grown in fits and starts, held together by an old-school mentality that no longer fit the world we were living in. I pushed for modernization, new technologies, better logistics, more efficient communication systems. I knew we had to change, to adapt, or risk falling behind. I introduced digital solutions that streamlined operations, expanded into new markets, and diversified our offerings to make Harper & Company a powerhouse in ways my father never could have dreamed. But it wasn't just about the business. It was about the culture I was creating within it. I made sure our employees felt empowered, heard, and valued. I knew that a company was nothing without the people who made it run. I wanted to foster a new kind of environment, one where innovation, teamwork, and mutual respect weren't just buzzwords on a mission statement, but values that permeated every aspect of our work. I pushed for more open dialogue, for greater transparency, for a space where ideas could flourish and mistakes could be learned from. As the months passed, the results were undeniable. The company was thriving, growing faster than it ever had under my father's leadership. Our revenue soared, and we expanded into new industries that had once seemed too risky, too unconventional. I began to see the true potential of what I had inherited. It wasn't just the foundation that my father had laid down. It was everything I had built on top of it. Every decision I had made, every risk I had taken had paid off. And with each success, I felt my confidence growing. But more than that, I felt the satisfaction of knowing that this was my legacy now. Not just my father's, but mine. I looked out over the city skyline from my office, the place that had once seemed so distant, so unattainable. The city was still bustling, still full of opportunities, but it felt different now. Felt like mine. Harper and Company was no longer just a business. It was a symbol of everything I had fought for. A testament to the fact that no matter how hard they tried to push me down, I had always been capable of more. I wasn't just the daughter of the founder anymore. I was the leader, the visionary, the one who had taken the company to places my father could never have imagined. But even with all the success, I knew the battle wasn't truly over. There would always be those who questioned my authority, who doubted my ability, who longed for the old days. But I was prepared. I had learned long ago that power was never given, it was taken. And as long as I was here, Harper and Company would continue to grow, continue to evolve. It would never be the same again, and that was exactly what I wanted. This wasn't just about keeping the business alive. It was about shaping it into something that no one could ever take from me, or from anyone else. I had built this. From the ground up, from nothing, I had turned a small logistics company into a billion-dollar empire. And now, as I stood at the helm, I knew one thing for sure. I would never let anyone take it from me again. The world could doubt me, could try to tear me down, but Harper and Company was mine. My vision, my future, and no one could ever take that away. The legacy I was building was not just a business. It was a movement, a testament to everything I had fought for. And as I looked ahead to the future, I knew that I was just getting started. There was so much more to accomplish, so much more to prove, and I would make sure that no one would ever forget the name Lena Bishop. A year had passed since I stood firm in the boardroom of Harper and Company, claiming my rightful place as the leader of the company. The business had flourished, and the numbers didn't lie. But despite all the success, despite the triumphs and victories in the corporate world, there was still an emptiness within me, a void that no amount of wealth or power could fill. Though I had built the empire I had always dreamed of, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The company was thriving, yes, but at what cost? My family was fractured. My relationship with my father had disintegrated into silence, and Zach, my own brother, had disappeared without a trace. It was a strange kind of loneliness, the kind that came from achieving everything I had ever wanted and still feeling incomplete. The corporate world, with all its accolades and successes, was no substitute for the things I had lost along the way. One day, as I sat in my office, reviewing another round of financial projections, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something inside me told me it was important. I glanced at the screen. My mother's name appeared. My heart skipped a beat. After everything that had happened, I hadn't heard from her in months. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Lena," my mother's voice came through, soft but laden with concern. "Can we meet?" I didn't hesitate this time. I agreed immediately. We needed to talk. I needed to know what she wanted to say. It had been far too long since we had spoken about everything. About my father, about Zach, about the family I had fought so hard to hold together, only to see it crumble. We met at a small cafe on the edge of the city, one of the places we used to go when I was younger, before all of this chaos. She was sitting at a table in the corner, her eyes scanning the room, but the moment she saw me, her gaze softened. She looked different. Older, maybe, but there was something else in her eyes. A weariness, an exhaustion that seemed to weigh her down. I sat down across from her, the silence between us thick and heavy. She wasn't smiling, and neither was I. There was too much unsaid, too much left unresolved. "Lena," she said quietly, after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know I love you, right?" I nodded, unsure of what to say. I had always known that, but it felt distant now, like a memory from another time. A time when things weren't so broken. But you also need to understand something, she continued, her eyes not leaving mine. I had hoped you would find a way to succeed without destroying everything around you. Her words hit me like a blow. I wanted to protest, to defend myself, but I couldn't, because deep down I knew she was right. The victory I had fought for, this empire I had built, had come at the cost of everything I had once held dear. My family, my relationship with my father, my bond with Zach. All of it had been sacrificed on the altar of ambition. I swallowed hard, the sting of her words settling deep within me. I never wanted it to be this way, I said quietly, my voice almost breaking. But you have no idea what it was like. You have no idea how much I had to fight just to be seen, to be recognized, to prove I was capable of leading this company. She reached out and placed her hand on mine, her touch gentle, as if trying to soothe a wound that had never truly healed. I know, sweetheart, I know you fought for it, but you need to ask yourself, was it worth it? Was it worth losing everything you truly loved just to win this fight? Her question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't answer immediately. How could I? How could I look at everything I had built, everything I had fought for, and suddenly see it as meaningless? I had won. I had the company, the power, the respect. But at what cost? I don't know anymore, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I thought it was all worth it. I thought if I could just make it mine, it would fill the emptiness. But now I'm not so sure. My mother's gaze softened, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Lena, this company, this empire, it's just a part of who you are. It's not everything. You don't have to carry the weight of it alone. The words struck me like a revelation. I had always believed that I had to be everything to everyone, that my worth was tied to this company, to my success, to my ability to prove everyone wrong. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was more to life than just winning. Maybe I had been chasing the wrong thing all along. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time, hope. I didn't know where this journey would take me next, or if I would ever truly mend the broken pieces of my family. But I knew one thing. I couldn't continue this path alone. I had to find a way to rebuild, not just the company, but my life, my relationships. Harper and Company would continue to grow, but it wouldn't be my only focus anymore. I needed to learn to balance ambition with the things that truly mattered, the people I loved, the ones who had been there through it all. And as I sat across from my mother, with the weight of my father's legacy still hanging over me, I realized that my journey was far from over. There was so much more to discover, so much more to learn. It wasn't just about building a legacy, it was about learning to live with it. The empire was mine, but so was my future, and for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to embrace both.